Descendants of secret Jews in any country in the world. There are several articles in the journals here. Brazil's got a lot of coverage. I have an article on Brazil last year, I think it was, and we have 2 or 3 members of the staff who closely identified with the journal who work talking about Brazil. But Brazil probably has the largest number of secret Jews for 2 reasons. First of all, Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world, population-wise. And secondly, of course, it was largely colonized by the Portuguese. And generally, it was a lot of the crypto Jews who were trying to get out of Spain or Portugal as much as they could, as fast as they could. So a good percentage of the people who left Spain and Portugal were Jewish because they were trying to get out. Now, some of them, after being on the ocean for a while, decided that they had enough waves and didn't want, 2 months of going up and down on ships that they weren't that sure about, and not even knowing what the condition was when they got to wherever they were planning to go. So a lot of them got all the various islands along the route. So the Canary Islands, the Madeira, all of these islands, even Puerto Rico, Cuba had a large number of secret Jews in the early years of the settlement in Cuba. And so many of them would just get off at the closest island because they decided they didn't want that long trip over the Atlantic Ocean. And so many of these islands, if anyone says that they have ancestors from the Canary Islands, pretty good possibility they have Jewish ancestors because that was one of the hot spots. And the various islands like that. We also sort of assumed that most of the secret Jews came that route, came to the Americas, the New World. Either continuing as secret Jews, as I mentioned, or coming out in a few places. But also, some of the Sephardim who were exiled from Spain and Portugal went to the east and joined the Ashkenazi community in Poland. Because the Jews in Poland, in Eastern Europe, whom most of you descended from, I would assume, had one of the highest birth rates ever recorded in the world.
Oh, right.
After all, think about it. What can you do on a cold night in Poland?
Yeah, procreate.
No television, no internet, no movies, no heat. You go to bed and you snuggle. And then little babies from snuggling. And so Poland had one of the largest recorded birth rates, the Ashkenazi communities. So just at the time that the areas where the Sephardim were living started slowing down because they were out of the routes of the new shipping routes and all of that, because the depth of the water, the depth of the ports had a lot to do with that. And so at that very same time, Eastern Europe had invited the Jews to come in. So Ashkenazim basically have a rectangular migration from Israel west to Rome, southern Italy, north up the Italian peninsula to the Rhineland, Germany and France, and then back east in a straight line back to Poland. So Ashkenazi migration is basically a 3-sided triangle: Israel, Italy, Rhineland, Poland. 3-sided triangle. The Sephardic migration is very different. And if you use Mizrahim, which would include the Jews of Iran and Iraq, Mizrahim simply means Eastern Jews, and would include generally the Jews of North Africa, as well as Iraq and Iran. And they generally are put together with the Sephardim. The Sephardic migration pattern is very different, starting in 586 BCE to what is today Babylonia, the Syrian conquering of Israel and all of this, and then also coming west to Italy, and then going up into Spain and Portugal. And so the Sephardic migration is very different, and was much more mixed in terms of marriages along big patterns from all the way from Iraq to Spain. That's why Ashkenazi, most of the so-called Jewish diseases are generally Ashkenazi, because the geneticists say that any 2 Ashkenazi Jews anywhere in the world are no more than the equivalent of 5th cousins removed from each other. And that's why it's mostly Ashkenazi that had the Jewish diseases, because there was so much marrying within a group. So at approximately 1200, 1300, that time period, where most of the Jews in the world are still Sephardic or Mizrahim, in the use of larger definition, a group of approximately between 25 and 50,000 Ashkenazim in the Rhineland. By 1880s were 7-8 million people, all from that little group of 25 to 50,000 people. So that's why the genetic thing is there. If you get a mutation, it spreads rapidly if it's a lot of intermarriage like that. The Sephardim were very different. So the Sephardim left because of this treatment. As I say, many of them stayed and converted to Catholicism, and many of them went into exile. Now, what about those who stayed? I've been talking about the exile more, but what about those who stayed in Spain and Portugal? Many of them, of course, were secret Jews, Marranos, hiding out, openly Jewish, openly Catholic, but still secretly practicing Judaism. If they got caught, they usually would be an auto de fe, which is a fire, death by fire. Even though there's also, let me clarify this, that most of those who faced an auto de fe were not killed. The number who were actually killed, burnt alive, was actually fairly small. Because even most of those who underwent an auto de fe did not actually burn to death and be killed, but that was far enough. But many of them also remained secretly Jewish for a while, but after 100 years or so, it was hard to maintain that. There were no books, there were no rabbis, and so many of them eventually did get absorbed into the Christian community. Maybe I should open it to questions here. I've sort of given an overview. Now, let me make one more point, however. DNA, of course, is coming in. And that's how I can show that, my closest match in the world, are actually with the secret Jews of Mallorca. But DNA, there was a DNA study that was published in December 2008, based on male DNA of 1,140 men in Iberia, 700 and something from Spain, 200 and something from Portugal, some from the islands, Mallorca, the islands on the east coast of Spain. And 20% of all men in Spain today, all Catholic basically today, 20% are genetically Jewish. Now, some people argue that, well, some of that might be the Phoenicians who were in Spain long before the Jews, and they have a similar Semitic DNA. And so the skeptics will say that some of that 20% might be Phoenician, and we grant that that is true. But the general opinion still is that the figure is probably close to 20% are actually genetically Jewish. 10% are genetically Arab or Berber, from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So if you go into a typical Spanish-speaking Catholic church in Dade County, now it's different if it's Mexican or Central American, because there you would have more Native American ancestry. Even though if you do in the male gene, the typical pattern for mestizos, my roommate's mestizo, my two closest friends is from Peru, mestizo from Peru, and one of my two closest friends is my Palestinian friend from Gaza. But we have very interesting conversations. And we're in that 80% who want peace, trying to work together so we can both live together with an Israeli state, a Jewish state, and a Palestinian state. I'm a Zionist, I support Israel, but I also believe that Palestinians are entitled to a state too. But anyway, if you go into a Catholic church where it's not Mexican or Central American ancestry, which would bring down the Jewish percentage because there would be more Native American ancestry, even though, again, that's supposed to be on the female line, not on the male line. But a typical Spanish-speaking Catholic church in Dade County, 30% of the people in that church are either genetically Jewish or Arab. Interesting work. Cuba would probably least that because a lot of the early settlers in Cuba were secret Jews. That was one of the hot spots because it was Havana was one of the major trading cities. So